Welcome back. Moving on to our second segment for today, moving into Paris to bring you more about one of the most interesting exhibitions for Ramses II. Well, this exhibition is one of the most important ones because the Ramses II, we consider him as one of the most important pharaohs of Egypt. To discuss this in more details, we have with us in the studio Mr. Ihab Kamel, tourism expert and researcher. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
We were just talking right now about Ramses II, the Great, Ramses the Great, and of course, as we mentioned, right, we need to talk more about Ramses II. We need to tell everyone about Ramses II and all about his achievements because he was able to do many things during a really critical period of time.
Well, we have to understand that Ramses II is a very special pharaoh, a pharaoh with a great deal of charisma even after thousands of years. It's enough to tell you that Ramses II is not only one of the pharaohs that had died at a very old age and ruled for a very long time, but his descendants for hundreds of years had been the ruling class for two dynasties. Even after the 20th dynasty, they had formed a special class of royalty or nobility in ancient Egypt. Ramses II, when he ruled at a very critical period, as you said, because he had a very difficult mission, which is retrieving back the Egyptian empire that was lost during the time of Akhenaten. 18 years of Akhenaten's reign during the 18th dynasty were just good enough to devastate the ancient Egyptian empire. Of course, after the end of the 18th dynasty, the father of King Ramses II, King Seti I, ruled for 30 years, and that had played a great role in the character of Ramses II because obviously King Seti I had prepared him to rule from a very young age. We have lots of scenes, especially in the temple of Abydos, where we see Ramses II as a crown prince with the side lock of hair on his face, and he's participating with his father in the Sed festival, or in one of the rituals, which was fighting the bull, which is an indication that Ramses II was very well prepared from a very young age. Even we believe that in the last years of King Seti I, he was ruling as a co-regent with his father. Ramses II, when he ruled at quite a young age, his late 20s, and he ruled a country that was stable from the inside because of all the reforms that were done by the great pharaoh, his father, King Seti I. And there was the big mission, which was retrieving back the Egyptian empire in Asia and in the ancient world. Of course, that was very important because Egypt had lived in the ancient times on foreign trades. They traded the goods, which were mainly food for Asia, barley, and bringing and things like gold, and bringing other goods from Asia, and that's how the Egyptian economy was based in the ancient times. Of course, all the pharaohs understood this equation quite well, and Ramses II had to retrieve back this empire. How? It's not something easy, especially that Syria at that time was not one state, one kingdom. No, it was divided into several kingdoms, what we call the city kingdom. Each city is a kingdom on its own. And at that time, there was a big superpower rising at the Anatolian cliffs, which was the kingdom of the Hittites. That had started steering rebellions in the Egyptian influence regions in Syria. And as I said, Egypt was still recovering, which made Ramses II face them indirectly several times. And there was no other alternative but to face the Hittites and their allies in the big battle of Kadesh, which we had seen depicted on many of his temples, which, by the way, one of the greatest architectural heritage that were left from the ancient Egyptian times, that were left by Ramses II.
And he made the first peace treaty in history.
Yes, this is true, But what is also very important, the language that this battle was described in one of the backsides of the pylons of the Karnak, we had a great poetry piece that's speaking in a great poetic language by a man. His name was Pintaur. Obviously, he was a poet at that time, speaking about this battle, and it's one of the very precious pieces of the ancient Egyptian literature as well.
We all know that French people are very much fond of Egyptian culture and civilization. And if I'm talking about the impact of such an exhibition to take place over there and attracting more visitors, because you are showing some precious pieces as well, you make me feel that I want to learn more and more. I want to see more from these pharaohs and the ancient civilization.
Well, of course, this is not something strange for the French. First of all, the Egyptology, it's a French branch of knowledge. They were the ones who discovered ancient Egypt and presented it to the world after the deciphering of the Rosetta Stone by Jean-François Champollion. And you can also say that the first achievements, they were extremely French. The first director of the Department of Antiquities, Auguste Mariette, he was French. Maspirou, he was French. So there's, you can say that even before the deciphering of the Rosetta Stone, when the French campaign came and they had brought with them their painters who had painted all the Egyptian temples, and they even painted the hieroglyphic texts without missing one single hieroglyphic sign, without knowing their meaning. So the French, they discovered Egypt. You can say that they had discovered Egypt and presented it to the world. So it's not something strange that you would send an exhibition like that to the French. It's enough to tell you that in the 70s, not many people remember that, but I remember at that time, I was a child, but it was a big event when the mummy of Ramses II went with an Egyptian passport to Paris to be studied over there or to be treated from some kind of fungus. And not only this, but it had an official reception with guards of honor. They are receiving a king. And I remember that I was seeing that on television very well. And the guards of honor were waiting for Ramses II. This is what France looks at the Egyptian civilization. That's how they look at it. The French, they have something called the Egyptomania, about everything that is ancient Egyptian or Egyptian. And they have their own achievements. It's enough to tell you that one of the French archaeologists, his name was Pierre Monty. Pierre Monty had made a discovery which is not less than the discovery of Tutankhamun, and part of it is exhibited now in Paris, the discovery of the cemetery of Tanis, the royal cemetery of Tanis, in 27th of February 1939, discovering tombs for the kings of the 21st, 22nd dynasties, almost intact. And with lots of treasures. It's enough to tell you that he discovered a pharaoh. For the first time, we see the sarcophagus of a pharaoh made out of silver. And silver in the ancient times, by the way, was more precious than gold, because gold was mined locally. Silver was imported, mostly from nearby west of Iran or the Persian Empire or something like that. So Pierre Monty, unfortunately, did not receive his fair share of fame, and I believe we owe him a lot. But unfortunately, when he made this discovery, it was already World War II had started. So, but showing the French, because everybody, when everybody thinks, when we talk about the ancient Egyptians' beautiful artifacts, he thinks of Tutankhamun, but nobody thinks about the Tanisian kings, the 21st and 22nd dynasties.
As you mentioned, they were intact, as you said right now.
Oh, yes, yes. Mummy masks, huge necklaces, bracelets, cups and dishes, all made out of solid gold and silver. two huge sarcophagi made out of silver, and they are the only silver sarcophagi we had discovered. I mean, we have the gold one of Tutankhamun, and we believe all the sarcophagi or the coffins of the previous pharaohs were made out of gold. But silver, that's something extremely new. We haven't seen anything like that. Something beyond belief, especially that at that time of the 21st and 22nd dynasties, the capital of Egypt had moved from Thebes to Tanis in the north, to the extent that Tanis was known as Thebes of the Delta. All these artifacts, like I believe they are showing the golden mask of King Amenemopet from the 21st dynasty in the exhibition in Paris. So it's a very good chance as well that with an exhibition about Ramses that we start promoting about something that nobody pays attention to, and I believe it can be a sort of a great attraction.
And I believe also this is the first time for Ramses II mummy also to be as part of an exhibition, right?
Yes, but it's the second time to be out of Egypt. The first time was in 1975. This is the second time.
To be tested or whatever was taking place?
In 75, it was being treated. They discovered that some kind of fungus appeared on the mummy, so the French, at that time, Egypt was starting a good relations with France during the time of President d'Estaing, and they asked, the French had offered to treat the mummy. The mummy stayed there for years, and it had a royal reception, an official reception, and when it came back, I believe the mummy was in a perfect condition. They had done a good job in the treatment of the mummy, which was threatened to be lost forever.
I believe now also the technology used and the lighting and all these pave the way for just you can enjoy it from different perspective. You can take the chance to really enjoy what you are looking at, and if you agree with me.
Of course. Let's get back in time, like 30 years ago, we used to look at a display showcase, looking at the artifact quite closely. Now you don't even need that now with artificial intelligence and virtual reality and all these technologies and the 3D exhibitions and holograms. I believe that the museological display became more interesting. And you feel that when you make the museum like the site itself, very mystical, very enjoyable. It stimulates all your imagination, all your senses. Without modern technology, the modern technology made the museum display, any museum display, completely different. Imagine that you're in a time machine and going back in time, or feeling that you're in the place of discovery.
Even we ourselves, I remember when we used, just as you mentioned, even when we were children, we used to go to the Egyptian museum, and we didn't have all this technology of today. And when we now are visiting the Museum of Civilization, the museum in Sharm el-Sheikh, the Grand Museum, of course, and all the preparations taken over there for the inauguration, well, all these really are very, very impressive. And I believe that also museums are very, very important if you want to learn anything about a country. The museum itself, and this is our competitive advantage.
Oh yes, yes indeed. And we have to understand that now making a museum is not something easy. There is a science about museums, how to display, how to build a museum. It's called museology, and it has specialists, and it's being taught in lots of universities. Museology, how to display. I'm glad that we understood this finally, and we had started building museums according to the scientific standards. Well, better being late than never. But I see that we had seen lately the construction of lots of museums which are built in a scientific way, which makes anyone really proud and happy. Because I believe that what we've got to offer is way much more than any other country. I remember I was walking in Zamalek one day and I saw a museum called the Museum of Islamic Pottery. Not many people know it. Small museum, but you go inside and you look at the display. Very impressive. Something beyond belief. We've got lots of things which they all deserve museums. We have lots of museums, and I believe that in the past few years, we had seen a big jump.
Yes.
In
Just
museums.
allow me, right now, before we move on, there is something that is really very, very important, the concept of itself of traveling. We are traveling with our culture to reach people all over the world, just showing them what we have. And definitely this has a direct and indirect impact on the Egyptian tourism industry in general. But just we're going to discuss this in more details right after our short break.